Thanks for all hanging about. My name's Scott, and I'm here to talk about Svelte and how you can start using it. So the title here, Building with SvelteKit, it wasn't meant to be Building with SvelteKit and GraphQL because it was actually a workshop, but it's now turned into a talk. So this isn't a workshop, sorry about that, but we're going to be taking a look at some code later on through the talk. So hopefully that will, you'll be okay with that. So just going to do a bit of an overview with Svelte, but first, let's talk about me. I'm a developer relations engineer over at Storyblock. If you haven't come to say hi already to us, we're over on the booth just outside the room here. So come say hi and pick up a cup and some stickers. I'm a workshop host. I've been doing workshops with Building with Svelte for around the last 18 months now. So some notable ones listed there. I'm a cat dad and also a human dad. Here are the cats plotting my ultimate demise by the looks of it there. Very sus. So yes, I'm from the UK, if you could tell by the accent. And as the token English person, I'm going to lean into that a bit for a second. So I'm from the land of fish and chips and afternoon tea, Mary Poppins and Hogwarts, where we call fries chips and where we call chips crisps. Also, when I've been traveling, I get asked a lot how I say bottle of water, and I'm just going to dispel the stereotype now. Maybe it's after a couple of drinks at the after party. You might catch me saying blah, 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 but not now. Okay, so I started working with Svelte and SvelteKit in April 2021. Prior to that, I was mainly working with Gatsby and React. And my initial thoughts of working with Svelte were, I've never Svelte like this before. I had to get the pun in there. The Svelte community like to put Svelte into lots of package names and stuff like that. So this is my contribution. Okay, so let's talk about Svelte and SvelteKit. But SvelteKit will eventually be the way you start most projects in the future. So SvelteKit is currently in release candidate phase at the moment, but once it's gone into V1, this will be your one-stop shop for how you build SvelteKit projects or Svelte projects. Before we get into that though, let's take a look at Svelte. So if you're not familiar, Svelte is a component framework. And Svelte is an actual word. Means lean and elegant, and obviously because there's not many unique names on NPM anymore, it seems like a good fit anyway. So this is the definition from DuckDuckGo. So apparently the origin of the word was French. So much like Vite, I pronounce it wrong. It could be Svelte. I've heard it pronounced many different ways, but I call it Svelte. Okay, so it's a component framework, much like React and Vue, except Svelte is a compiler. More on this later. It's been around for longer than you might think. V1 was released in 2016, November 2016, and V3 was where it all kicked off with reactivity. So there's a great talk from Rich Harris, Rethinking Reactivity. If you're interested, I'd strongly recommend you go and check out that video from Rich. It's a great video where it goes into reactivity in Svelte 3. Okay, so everyone knows what a framework is, right? Component frameworks like React and Vue allow you to write code more declaratively. So declarative, this means that you're writing what you want the outcome to be rather than telling the browser exactly what to do. So you've got declarative versus imperative, where you tell the browser everything they want to do. So let's take a look at some imperative code. So in here, we'll just define a button and define another variable for count. Then we're going to create the button element, add in some text to it with the count variable, and then we also need an event listener to trigger when we click on it. So that's going to increment each time. It's a very contrived example, but we're going to be using that for the rest of the slides, so bear with me on that. And here is the declarative version in Svelte. I mean, this is, we're just saying what we want the outcome to be here. So this is the Svelte specific one, like I just said. We can take a look at the equivalent one in React here. So just to go back to this quickly, we're using the onClick directive, which is part of Svelte here, and then we're just updating our button with the count. So the React version, again, we're just going to use a handy-dandy use state for our example, and we're going to return it in a button. So the keen eye amongst you will see that that return statement isn't in parentheses. It should be like on one line, but that's a lot of code for one screen. It's taking a lot of real estate there. So, and then we could do the same with Svelte. So it's a lot less code, and I'm going to be making more comparisons. I mean, it's only natural to compare, so I think this is a good representation of it. So with Svelte, you're writing about 40% less code versus React. So how is Svelte different? It's a compiler. So that means we don't need to ship the framework runtime to the browser like you do with React and Vue. So with a compiler, you're just shipping what is needed, because Svelte understands before the project is built what needs to be done, and it just ships exactly what is needed. So with the compiler-centric approach, you get generally smaller apps because there's no need for a framework runtime to be shipped to the browser. JavaScript, byte for byte, is the most expensive thing on the web. So less JavaScript, yay. And there's no need to regenerate the virtual DOM because Svelte makes surgical granular updates as it knows what needs to change. So Svelte takes all that logic up front and tries to do as much as it can before build time. So you get to write less code, like I said earlier, typically 40% less code versus React. And you also get modern web development best practices out of the box. My colleague Josephine, and I know Chris, we're both talking about accessibility. That's built into the compiler. It can catch that up front before you actually push anything to production. It allows you to manage cross-component state with stores, which is just like a writable object you get. You get built-in element transitions, so there's no need for third-party packages with that. And if you're not using a specific feature, then it will always ship the minimum subset of the framework features you need. So again, you get much smaller bundle size shipped to the browser. Okay, let's go back to comparing examples. So last one, I think. That's what I'd stick that in there. So with Svelte, it's a single file-based component structure. So that means we get our script here, where we can put in our JavaScript. Then we have a markup, where we can add in any HTML we need. And then we can add in some style tags and then put in any styles we need for our button here. But if you're using something like Tailwind, you can shorten that down a lot more by adding your utility classes straight to your markup. But essentially, that is the taxonomy of a Svelte file is just your script tags, your markup, and your style. Okay, so let's talk about reactivity in Svelte. So, as I mentioned earlier, Rich Harris did an awesome talk on this. I'm just going to touch on it. I'm not going to be doing any of a deep dive but you can go into the Svelte REPL and do an example like this. So say if you wanted to have a variable where we double what the count is. So each time count changes, then doubled will times that by 2. So we're just going to use this $: here, and that's telling the Svelte compiler that that variable is going to react to the value of count now. And I'm just whacking it in the p tags just so we can see what it is. But if you're looking at this $: thinking, what is that? What the fornication is that? It is actually valid JavaScript. It's the label statement in JavaScript. So the Svelte team decided to co-opt it because it's so uncommonly used in JavaScript that they thought it would be a good one to use for using reactivity throughout Svelte. So are there gotchas with using reactivity in Svelte? And you betcha there are some, because it works on assignment. Methods that mutate arrays or objects will not trigger updates themselves. So for this, we change push and we just assign numbers back to itself and just spread it in there with the ES6 spread operator there. And that works great. There's also stores in Svelte. I think I mentioned earlier, it's just a writable object. These are super handy, and I'll be talking briefly about these later, but these are very handy just for global state throughout the app. Here's a contrived example from the Svelte documentation. It's really simple, but you can get really complex with stores. I've seen some excellent talks on those recently. So with Svelte, you're just writing HTML. Man, it looks tiny on there. And it looks a lot bigger on my screen when I was doing it. So anything in the HTML spec is going to be valid in Svelte. And obviously you can just sprinkle in your JavaScript when you need it. So Svelte actually is a HTML superset. And there's some reference points here. If you can get out your camera quick enough before I change the slide. Oh, okay. So there's a great point in the documentation where it's saying the platform provides, because with Svelte, you're basically just using the platform for creating your apps, let's say. Okay. Let's talk about SvelteKit. What is SvelteKit? So as I mentioned at the start of the talk, it's going to be like your one-stop shop for building projects in Svelte. So if Svelte is the UI layer, then SvelteKit is the meta framework on top of that. With SvelteKit, it essentially makes it full stack. You get HTTP endpoints, file-based routing, server-side and client-side rendering, and code splitting for all the projects there. So a good way to, all projects need to have data from somewhere, unless you're just doing a static site. So we'll take a look at data loading in SvelteKit, but before we do that, let's take a look at file-based routing. And if you're familiar with Next.js, let's say, this sort of layout might look familiar. The one over on the left, this is how things used to look before the release candidate phase happened in SvelteKit in September. So you just create an index file, index.svelte file, and then that would be your page. In September, they changed the way the routing is done. For the better, I might add. People got mad when this changed because people were doing their routes like this, and then when that changed, they had to change a lot of stuff. There's a lot of refactoring happening when all this changed, but I like this approach here. So let's take a look at some data loading examples. So I'm going to try and type. Let's try and do this. Let's put this here. Right. Where's VS Code? How's that look? Let's take. So if I go over to localhost on here, yeah, okay, cool. And it looks like I'm not running this. Where's my terminal gone? What? Right, cool. Right, let's go there. And the dev server. Right, so this is going to update here. So this is just an example project where going off to get some data from the CoinLaw API, which is a REST API, and there's also some stuff for GraphQL API. For Rick and Morty, I think Dustin mentioned this earlier. So let's bump up this font size. Okay, cool. Let's make this a bit bigger. All right. Sweet. So each one of these links here is just referring to, oh my God, bump this up to, maybe not that big, there we go, to the roots folder here. So let's just do a quick tour of the Svelte project. So a lot of these files here, configuration files, the main part is in the source file here. And when Svelte builds, it builds out to this app.html file. And in here, we get the Svelte body, where everything is rendered out into from the roots. And then there's also a Svelte head API, which I haven't actually implemented in the example, but we can take a look at that later. And I'm also using this data theme attribute, which is part of Daisy UI. Because I'm using Tailwind, because I didn't want to code this all by hand, style it all by hand, sorry. Okay, so let's look at this first route here. So I'm just going off to this CoinLaw API, and I'm just getting the first 100 coins, I think. So let's take a look at this page.js file. So this plus notation, a lot of people don't like it. I think it's fine. It helps the router identify what needs to be loaded. So each page.svelte file, you can take a look at my notes here. So page.svelte gets its data from the load function, and the load functions can be defined as page.js or TS if you prefer TypeScript. You might notice I'm using JS docs here just for ease of the demo. Let's grab some water. Yeah, and you can also put your data in a layout.js file, page.server, or layout.server.js files. So page.js and layout.js will load the data both client and server side, and the .server will just go off to the server. So you can see at the top of my script tag here, we're using export.let, which I didn't actually cover in the slides. Export.let is just a way for a component to receive props. Because Svelte is a compiler, this can be done, we can do this. And export.let is the way that props are received in Svelte files. And I'm just destructuring the currencies from this data object here. So that data object is defined in this page.js file. We'll take a look at that in a second. But before we do that, just using the Svelte each directive here to loop through all of the currencies in the response from the page.js file, and then they're being rendered out onto the browser here, just for the title. So let's take a look at this page.js file. So this is the load function. It's async. You see I've put in this public token here. This is just to illustrate that this is visible on the client, but also on the terminal, but for some reason it's not on there. Okay, we'll gloss over that and move on. So it's available on both the client and the server. And we're just going to fetch our data here, and we're going to return it. So the return here, because of the page notation, it knows that page is going to receive a data prop, and then in that we've got the currencies from the coin law API. Okay, so what if you want to load? We get data from more than one source. We can do that with waterfall here. So in here, doing pretty much the same, going off to get a request from the coin law API, destructuring out the data from the JSON response there. And then I'm also making a second request here to the Rick and Morty GraphQL API, and just getting all the characters in the query there. And then I'm getting the characters here and the data from both of these requests. So this is going to cause like a waterfall request here. So if I go over to my, wow, that's so small, network tab. Let's clear this out here. And we've got it on fetch. Let's go back here. Clear this. And we go over to waterfall here. And we get that data. You notice that so the data came in first for the tickers, and then GraphQL came in quite a while afterwards there. But if we could do that in parallel. So if we go back over to the code here, it's got an example of doing it in parallel. So we're just batching up these separately now. So for each function here, it's going to return the data for each one. And then we're going to call that data. So they happen in tandem. So we could also do the same with promise all. Very much the same things, the same calls, but we're just wrapping these in a promise all here. I prefer the other methods, but you do which way you prefer. Okay. So one thing you might have noticed as well on the links here is there's this data.SvelteKit prefetch. So that will point to any A tags which are if it's a root which exists in the project which has a load function. On hover, it will go and run that load function before click. So let's just try and demonstrate that quickly here. So if I just clear this out and hover over coins here, you can see that it's loaded up the tickers before I even click on the link there, and it will take me to it. So if I just hit a hard refresh and then just click on this quickly, you notice it took fractionally longer to do. So when the user is visiting the site, those extra couple of, half a second really helps with fetching additional data. Where else am I going with this? Okay, so yeah, there was also the page.server. So page.server means if you've got some sensitive credentials, then you can use page.server to go off and add in your super secret token, which I'm just printing off here. And then you can go off, get the information, and it won't be exposed on the client. This is a new feature which is coming to Svelte on the release candidate, and it's a much needed one for me personally. So if we go clear off our network panel again, and if we go to page server here, and we hover over this, we set a data JSON as does come in rather than the actual endpoint. So let's go back on over to that. And then we just got our currency data here. I think that's pretty much where I was going with the example in data loading, but it's a really handy feature, and one I'm really happy with the recent changes that happened. Okay, so let's go back to my slides. Okay. So, why would you want to use Svelte? Awesome developer experience, but you know, I've been using it for 18 months, so I might be a bit biased. I'm hoping I could convince you that it's a good experience. But if you're trying to propose this to the business, to your manager, to say, look, I think this is really cool, I think we should use it. They don't really care about the developer experience. I mean, not in isolation or for the sake of the developers. Businesses, they care about outcomes, and outcomes essentially are the business experience. So the thing with Svelte, and I hope I highlighted it earlier with the comparisons, it's a lot more succinct, it's a lot simpler to understand. So this means new developers to a project can quickly get up to speed with using it. They can quickly understand what's going on. This means that it reduces lead time. So a friend of mine, Chris Ellis, he's a CTO of a company called Connect.Tech, and they went all in on Svelte. And he said lead times were reduced by 40%. But he also said 95% of statistics are made up on the spot. So take with that what you will. But I thought that was a good stat to share. But he said that this means time to fix bugs is reduced. But again, the businesses don't really care. You say, look, I fixed 20 bugs. They don't care about that. But if you can do it faster, then that's going to reduce the lead time and save budget. So your businesses get that. They care about that. So Svelte's smaller. So you get smaller bundle sizes. I'll go back to Chris's example again. He works in many countries where they don't have high-powered phones, high internet speed connections. So because of the relatively small JavaScript that's being shipped to the browser, things work faster. So if you're working in those sort of situations, then Svelte is a really good choice. Like I just said, it works on low power and low quality devices. And of course, because of the reduced sizes, then you get better performance. So let's just talk about performance for a bit as well. So it's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's important. And how it interacts with the site, it does impact rankings, click-through rates, and the time spent on page, and obviously return rates as well. But we all know bounce rates and conversions are where all this really matters. So you want your site to be fast, but how fast is fast enough? I'm sure everyone knows it. It's 2 seconds. So this is taken from a survey in 2018. So it's probably changed now, but if your site isn't interactive in the first 3 seconds, then you're losing nearly a third of your visitors. So performance does matter. Okay. Right, enough about performance. Then we talk about GraphQL. So I use GraphQL quite a lot. I love building with it. And as I said at the start of the talk, I used Gatsby pretty much exclusively from around 2019 to 2021, mid-2021. So I'm very comfortable with making queries in GraphQL. So if you're not familiar with GraphQL, it's a very simple query language, simple to understand. You get what you ask for. You're not overfetching like you can do with REST APIs, where you just get all of the information in one go. With GraphQL, you can be very specific about what data you want to retrieve. You can use it on the browser and on the server. And one thing I'm quite excited about is federation. So federation is basically just a fancy word for bringing together your data sources. So this is how some federation could work with Storyblock. You go off, get the name and description of a product, let's say, and then we could go check a third-party API and get the inventory for it, the price maybe from Stripe or something like that. Okay, and then we just do the rest of the query. Alrighty, so we can take a quick look at some client-side tools I use with SvelteKit. Those are Houdini. Houdini's for the client, and there's also another project by the Guild, if you're familiar with GraphQL. Jean-Yves Couillet, he and Alec Alves have both combined KitQL and Houdini. Houdini is now firmly focused on the front end, and KitQL is more of a server-side thing. And there's also Urkel. I think in the slides here, we're just going to look at Urkel. So if you're familiar with Urkel, it stands for Universal React Query Library. And I know I said React, but there are Svelte bindings for it. So if we have our layout.svelte file here, which you can't see because it's clipped on the screen now, but this is typically where you would define your data loading for information you want for the whole project, let's say. So again, it's a contrived example. We're just going to use the create client and set context client from Urkel here. And we're going to create a client, we're going to pass in our Rick and Morty GraphQL API again, and then we're going to set the context client with that. So that's important because this has, using Svelte stores now, that client, anything which is used in there is essentially now in a Svelte store. So we can use that in, look at the size of that. We could use that in a Svelte page file here. And we could just write it directly in some script tags here. We're just going to use the get context client, which is we're getting the client from context. We're going to write in some GraphQL here and put that information into the query store. So that means that characters query store variable we created now. We could debug that, so you notice that there's a dollar variable there. That's how you access the contents of a store in Svelte. So that'll just dump out some JSON, which would look like this on the page there. So now we know we've validated the data from that. We could go off and we could do some validation just to make sure that it's not fetching and there's no errors. And then if we get past both of those, then we can just start looping over the store information now, and just rendering out the information for the characters and their images. Let's go step through that. Cool. So looks like I've hit closing comments. Brilliant. Okay, so for me, there are great client-side tools to use for GraphQL in SvelteKit. You might have noticed in the code example I was using earlier, I wasn't actually using a client. I was just doing a post request to the endpoint to get the data. But It's all about the developer experience, and Houdini and KitQL really do provide that. So also, like I mentioned as well, you get a decrease in lead time for development. A lot of people who pick up SvelteKit always rave about the amount of time that it takes to build a typical project. So that's already impressive. And of course, small bundle sizes, because it's a compiler. We're not shipping loads of stuff to the browser. And because of the reduced JavaScript, increased performance. Okay, so that's pretty much me going to wrap up. There's some really good Svelte content creators out there. If you want to get some, check out some YouTube videos. Jeff Rich, he's an actual core maintainer of Svelte. He's got a great blog where he's really good at writing about concepts in Svelte and SvelteKit. Scott Zielinski, he's really popularized Svelte over the last year or so. Tanling Hao, hello. If you've seen his videos, you know what I mean. And there's some other ones there, Joy Code, Hunter Bytes, all really good content from those guys. So if you're interested, I'd strongly suggest you check out those guys. And that's it for me. Thank you.